Hi guys, let's talk about 3 books that I recommend that everybody should read. Number 1, Rich Dad, Poor Dad. If you haven't read this book already, and especially if you're in your 20s or your teens, go and read it. The rest of your life will be like far easier. It will just make everything click into place. If you're older and you already know a lot of the principles about making money, etc., still read it. You can get it on PDF, you can buy it on audiobook, you can get it all over the place. What did I like about it? The main thing that I liked about Rich Dad, Poor Dad is that it makes every pound or dollar seem like a little soldier. Guys, you know, say you've got $1 in your pocket and you think, oh right, that's just $1 in my pocket. But if you put that $1 to work in some kind of business, stocks, shares, anywhere where you invest it, think of it like this. That's $1 is 100 cents, which is like 100 soldiers. You put those soldiers to work and they go out and they're fighting wars and, you know, doing all of whatever they do. And then they recruit another 5 soldiers, which is a 5% return. Next year, you've got 105 soldiers, right, that you put out and they go out to work and then they come back with more soldiers. Let me put this into a larger sum of money. So imagine you put $1,000 to work somewhere, right, and you're getting a 5% return. So you send out 1,000 soldiers. Next year, they come back with 1,050 soldiers, right? Next year, when you send that money out, it's not going to be 1,000 soldiers, it's going to be 1,050 soldiers. So first of all, that 1,000 soldiers is going to bring you back an extra 50 soldiers. And then that 50 soldiers that you had off the previous year is also going to bring you like a 5% return. Now, let's see if I can get the maths right in my head. That would be 2.5 soldiers extra that would come back. So the year after, you've got 1,000 soldiers, 50 soldiers that you just got off this year, 50 soldiers off last year, and 2.5 soldiers that you got off the year before. So what I'm trying to say is when you put money to work, they bring back more and more and more. And before you know it, you've got an army and you're making loads of money. Rich Dad, Poor Dad always teaches you to mind your own money. And what do I mean by that? It teaches you that look after money that you've already earned. Look after cash flow. Don't just willy-nilly, you know, let that money lie in a bank account. It's the same soldiers thing, but what it's really doing is it's teaching you financial literacy. It's just not saying, you know what, you've specialized in becoming a geography teacher and you go out there and then you get to 65 years old and you retire and you've got a, you know, measly pension. It's saying, you know what, you can be a geography teacher, but what you can do is you can put a little bit of your money to work in a business somewhere, or a side hustle as it's known these days. So in the Rich Dad, Poor Dad, he's always teaching you, well, why not put it in stocks and shares? Why not put it in real estate? He's basically saying be in charge of your own destiny. Don't rely on the government and pension funds to look after you. So you know what? Some really famous people have made their children read this book. You know, you've probably heard of a Will Smith actor. He like openly says that he made his children read Rich Dad, Poor Dad so they could learn about financial literacy.
Why did you want to share that book with your son?
You know, it's interesting that no matter how successful you get, it's really difficult to shake your mindset.
If rich guys and really successful guys like him are doing it, why don't you do it as well? What Rich Dad, Poor Dad also teaches you is that your mind is your biggest asset. Make sure that you're always expanding your mind. Thus, you will have the capability to earn more, grow more, invest more, and just have an overall better life. So guys, the second book I recommend is How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie. So after reading that book, right, I was like, damn, Shaz, I wish I'd read this book when I was 20. Everything that book said was things that I had learned now, but they just took me another decade and plus some to learn that. So that book was saying, don't criticize others. If you want to tell them how to improve, find a nice way of saying it. Also, it taught me to be generous with my praise, and I really acted that out in my organization and everywhere. You know, usually I'd be like, okay, the guys know that I think they're trying hard. They must know, because, you know, I don't tell them off. But in the book, you need to say it. You can't just presume that just because all your staff are doing really well and you like smile at them, etc., or anybody in life, that they're going to think that, okay, he likes me or I've been doing something right. So it's like, be generous with your praise. One of the other things it taught me was remember people's name. People love it when you call them by the names and remember their names. So if I was to say, Liam, could you edit this please? Liam, could you do this? Liam, could you do that? And then Liam's brain tells him that, oh, Shaz has the foresight to remember my name, and look, he mentions it every time he talks to me. Liam will naturally like me. So that's one of the main things I learned from this book. After reading that book, I realized that more nicer that you are to people, the more they will do for you. You know, when you go out there and you're trying to tell somebody something for their own benefit, and you're just like, no, this is good for you, do it. Well, after reading that book, I would be like, okay, you know what? You've got this problem. How do you think you can sort it out? And, you know, I would listen to the person. I'd be like, well, you could try this. I know you know best, and I recommend this. Instead of many years ago, I would have been like, okay, you know what? You're asking me for advice on this. I know about it. You're doing this wrong. Please just do this. I would still be nice about it, but I just didn't have like the finesse of making them totally understand in a way where they thought it was their idea or where they felt really comfortable. So this book taught me that I could go, you know, around about nicer ways of telling people off for their own benefit. Another thing that is great in this book that I think I used to do anyway was acknowledge your own mistakes. Because, you know, when you acknowledge your own mistakes, if you do something wrong and you're like, okay, I've done that wrong, that's the only way you can fix it. But if you're in like this bubble of, okay, everything's going wrong and none of it's my fault, you will never grow. You will be blaming others. That book teaches you not to blame others. It tells you to take responsibility. I've been learning for the last 15, 20 years, right? And if I had read this book when I was 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, early 20s, tell you what, I would have had a much easier life, probably would have been way more successful, and, you know, all the mistakes that I've made, I probably would have just made them once or twice instead of many, many, many times. Right, guys, so the third book is The Power of Habit by Charles Duhigg. Why do I love that book? I love that book because I know that routines make you better. And one of the routines that I read in that book was they do a study on triggers and habits and what happens next. So sometimes, you know, guys, back in the day, you used to see people eat their dinner and then straight away they wanted a cigarette. It wasn't really that they wanted a cigarette, it was the habit of always eating their dinner and then having a cigarette. You know, if you can work this out in your mind, how things work, you can break habits, you can make good habits. Like, let me tell you one that I used to do a lot, and it really helped me. When I got up in the morning, I would make my bed and I would put a book on top of my pillow. So now, you know, when I got home from work the next day and I was getting ready for bed and, you know, I went over to my bed, I had to lift that book up off the bed to get in. You know what that is? That's a habit. Once I had that book in my hand, I'd be like, okay, I'm going to read the book, put it to the side, go to sleep. Next day, wake up, do my bed and put it on the bed again, which means it's a cue to read it and you know, maintain a healthy lifestyle. There was other examples in there of, you know, that they were doing on animals back in the day, and they could train, you know, mice and rats and all of that. And actually there was one experiment that I saw that, you know, showed what hope can do for animals or probably even people. They had some rats that they would throw in some water, and they were wild rats, and after about, you know, half an hour of swimming, the rats would just sink to the bottom and potentially die. I think they'd grab them before they did, right? They wouldn't let some rats die. They did one thing, right? They put loads of wild rats in, and the rats would swim and they'd start to sink to the bottom after about half an hour. And then they put like a tame rat in that had an owner, and they put that rat in and it kept on swimming after 30 minutes, and it kept on swimming for 1 hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, and then it kind of started to sink to the, you know, to the bucket of, down the bucket of water, and it was about to die. And then they took it out, you know, they dried it off and they put it back in. And the next time it didn't swim for 3 hours, it swam for like something like 10 hours, because now it had hope in its mind that somebody's going to come along and rescue me. So it was willpower that just kept him going. So once you know something is possible, you will go for longer. So I think they did that experiment again with all them, you know, wild rats. They took them out, they toweled them off, and then they put them back in, and none of them sunk for like many, many, many hours, because they now had hope in their heart that something or someone was going to pull them out. Yeah. And this is like, you guys have all probably heard this, that many years ago, nobody had ever ran a mile in 4 minutes or 5 minutes or whatever it was. And nobody could ever do that. And they were like, it's impossible, blah, 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 blah. Then one person broke that record and ran that mile in under 4 or 5 minutes. Then the next year it was 15 people, and the next year it was 30 people, and now everybody does it. Why? Because we know it's possible. It's given us hope. We know it's doable. So look, it's willpower. You know it's possible to run that mile in that many minutes, and your willpower is like, you're going to do it as well. So these are the things that I learned from these books. Thank you for watching. Don't die average. Do like and subscribe, and see you next time.